But of course, you knew that then. You could infer it from coming. Right? Because the Supreme Court is clearly deferring to the states to organize their educational system as they see fit and think best. Can you pass the tell it in the union test? Any questions? Lack of clarity? Fuzziness? Yes, Mr. Palmer.
Was Rice the superintendent?
No, he was in behalf of the school. I mean, Rice comes in behalf of the school district. All right. Let me now turn to my concluding observations. Now, given what I have said for you, you know that in June or July, the Supreme Court will hand down a decision on affirmative action. Whether it is constitutionally permissible to use race as a criterion, not the criterion, not the sole criterion. Clearly, Martha Love was excluded from Rosedale, what? Solely because she was yellow. And the black students at Berea are excluded from Berea solely because they were black. The Supreme Court, in its Bakke decision, and I don't think I'll get a chance to discuss Bakke with you because that's way down in the semester, said clearly that race cannot be the sole criterion in making admissions decisions, or in the allocation of any good, for that matter, under the Constitution. But might it be a criterion? And it said yes. What is now being litigated is whether race can be a criterion in admissions decision. Not the sole criteria. Different question. So you know, and you have seen in the context of the rise of Jim Crow, the state of black people in the society at the outset of the 20th century. You know, President Johnson in 1965 at Howard University made a most interesting observation. 65, the big Civil Rights Act of 1964, is really less than a year old, just about a year old actually. But actually, when he made the speech, it's short, just a little bit under a year. And he makes an interesting observation and he says that you do not take a person, I'm going to say this again before this lecture is over, but I wanted to start. You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberated. Right? The black individual hobbled by chains, what? 11 1/2 generations of chattel slavery. 1 decade of a little reprieve between the Civil War and the fall of the Reconstruction. And then now 5 generations of de jure Jim Crow of the sort that I have discussed with you. You do not take a person who has been hobbled by chains and liberated, bring him to the starting line of a race and then say, you are free to compete with all of us. Right? You know, you're free. Compete. Let me just read it through without interjection. You do not take a person who has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him to the starting line of a race and say, you're free to compete with all of us, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. In other words, when one takes an individual or individuals, individually or by group, hobbled by 11 1/2 generations of chattel slavery and 5 generations of Jim Crow, Johnson is speaking in 1965, what I just said to you. Does one now say, you're completely free, compete with all of those others who have had a generational and transgenerational head start over? You see, class, It wasn't so long ago. Well, I told my other class, that Jews were very helpful in regard to the civil rights struggles. Of course, you do know that in many ways severe tensions have developed between blacks and Jews over the whole matter of affirmative action. In the 1950s, Yale wouldn't take Jews. Matter of fact, the very school from which both Bush 41 and Bush 43, President Bush 41, President Bush 43 attended, wouldn't take Jews in the 1950s. Interestingly enough, in 1977-78, one of those 2 years, so you can put them both on the question mark, but what I'm about to tell you is absolutely accurate. Henry Rossowski, Dean of the faculty at Harvard University, who was instrumental in revising Harvard's undergraduate curriculum in 1977-78, turned down the presidency of Yale. But who was Henry Rossowski? A Jew. Very interesting. So, one generation earlier, as recent as one generation earlier, Yale turned Jews away. One generation later, a Jew turned down the presidency of Yale to remain at Harvard. Dean at Harvard rather than president at Yale. And that whole matter of questions of preference has become has continued as a wedge issue between blacks and Jews. But you see, it wasn't so long ago, and then we go back just to the 1950s, when in a place like Miami, Florida, there were signs which said, no Negroes, dogs, or Jews allowed. Right? Big signs. No Negroes, dogs, or Jews. Not so long ago. I mean, I was alive in the 50s. Jim Crow informed black people that regardless of what the Constitution and statutes might say about their state in the society, in the context of American culture and traditions, they were inferior people. So that when Justice Henry Billings Brown said, and you know this now, if one race be inferior to the other socially, the Constitution of the United States cannot put them on the same plane. He captured very starkly and strikingly the benightedness, the vileness, and the moral vulgarity of racism. That's basically what he did. But the question here that one should ask is, if they are indeed socially inferior, why are they so? Is that a reasonable question to ask? What are the conditions that made possible that social inferiority and also foster its continuance? Well, see what is interesting here also, class, that in that statement, because he states, if one race be inferior socially, in that statement, Henry Billings Brown assumes axiomatically the biological inferiority of black people, even though he doesn't say it explicitly. And this presumed natural inferiority is used to ground a prescribed social inferiority, presumption, assumption of biological inferiority, establishment of social inferiority, a nexus of both. Well, sort of reasoning we know is quite specious. Yesterday, for example, and I did print it up, I hope I can find it. Because I printed it up, and don't tell me now I can't find it. It's got to be here. I saw it on the computer yesterday. What have I done with it? And the minute I go downstairs, I'll be able to find it. It concerns the completion of the human genome. Oh, here it is. You could find this on your computer yesterday. Human genome sequence completed. And it says scientists have completed the finished sequence of the human genome, or the genetic blueprint of life. And it points out, of course, what, there was an earlier draft of this distributed in 2000, that Homo sapiens as us, of course, animals. Very arrogant to believe that we are so special. We're just common animals. We used to say that we had 1 million genes. Then the million went down to 100,000, which then went down to 60,000. We now know that we have a mere 25 to 30,000 genes, maximum. And interestingly enough, it points out that the common nematode, the nematode worm has about 17,000 genes. So we haven't really got very many more than a small worm. Little nematode that gets into your bloodstream, do a lot of damage. And I didn't distribute it to you, but when I taught this class last semester, I did distribute it then, because the sequencing of the mouse genome had just been completed at the Sanger Institute in London, the place which has just completed this work. And it showed that between man and mouse, we have 80%, the mouse has 30,000 genes, just about the same number that we do. That between man and mouse, we have 80% of our genes like for like, in other words, 1-for-1 substitution. And that a mere 300 genes separate us. 300. And that by class of genes, man and mouse are 99% identical.